Hi there, welcome back to Language Professora. In this video, we're going to be delving into a literature text that has been set for grade 7, some grade 7s that is, for high schools in Jamaica. And the name Jamaica is actually in the title of the book. Some of you may know this book, some of you may not. If you know it, come right along with me. We're going to be delving into chapter 1 of this text. For future reference, I am going to be using the abbreviation in the title of the video going forward, so just look out for it. I will keep the thumbnail consistent, so anywhere you see the thumbnail, you know another chapter has been posted. Anywho, we're at chapter 1 in this text, and the title of chapter 1 is At Home. What we're going to be doing, which is one of the reasons why I would have done all of the preliminaries regarding introduction to literature and how you study literature, I'm going to be going through the chapters as it pertains to the elements of a story. So for each chapter, I'm going to be looking at the plot, the characters, the setting, and the theme. All right, so gear yourself up for that approach. We're not going to be summarizing the story in any way, form, or shape. Before coming to this video, you should have an idea what the chapter is about. So what I'm really trying to do is assist you in pulling out pertinent pieces of information. So we're going to be examining the plot first of all. The first thing that happens is the story is opening with Frank in bed, and he's having an internal conflict. Remember, we spoke about conflict, that it's a problem that the character faces or a decision that has to be made. And in this internal conflict, he's trying to decide whether or not he should get out of bed. Let us see how his actions impact the rest of the story. He ends up falling asleep. His mother realizes he's not awake and doing his chores and prepares to flog him. Now, we spoke about suspense as well. So by now, in reading, you should be saying, oh my gosh, Frank is asleep. His mother is going to flog him. You know, there should be that level of excitement, anxiety, anticipation, that heightened emotion coming to the fore when you get to this part of it. A tussle ensues. She calls for her husband to help to catch Frank. But Frank is hiding underneath the bed, and in the tussle that is continuing, he ends up hitting his mother accidentally, and of course that makes her more upset. He gets out of the house. So let us take a look at this little snippet. The initial conflict was, should I get out of bed or not? If he had gotten out of bed, his mother would not have flogged him and he would not have had that tussle with her. So we're seeing how the decisions made with the conflict impact the rest of the story. He made the wrong decision, he fell asleep, and the tussle ensued, and this is the end of it. So the climax and the resolution come about with the conflict being resolved in a sense, right? Because the conflict of not getting out of bed has been resolved. That's the end of this. He eventually got out, based on being flogged by his mother, and he eventually gets away from his mother. Now, he decides that he needs to get back into her good graces, and so he's going to go and do his chores. Remember, we're looking at the plot. So we're looking at the events that are unfolding as he goes. So he goes to the river with an old kerosene tin, and he runs into his friend Jeff. Eventually, there are other children coming to collect water. I want to mention some other things, but I don't want to overlap with the other elements. So I'll get there when I get there. So other children are coming to collect water. The beating that he got earlier in the chapter, we see where he spoke about the fact that he felt a way that the age that he is, he's the only child in the community that's being beaten by his mother, and his friends at school would often make fun of him. So of course this is a sore point for him. So when he's collecting the water and the marks left from the strap are noticed, it creates another problem. And in defending his pride, a water war ensues. Water war and kids throwing water back and forth in an attempt to defend his pride. But now he has another problem. He's soaking wet. So when he gets home soaking wet, he makes up an excuse to tell his mother why he got wet. He decides to sweep the yard again. He is trying to get back into her good graces, so he has brought the water. She's still fussing and fuming. He decides to sweep the yard before getting his breakfast. He gets his breakfast and she gives it to him on an old chipped plate that he does not like. So here again is another conflict. Frank is deciding to do something. He doesn't like the plate, so what does he decide to do? He decides he's going to break the plate after he's finished eating. I want you to remember, every time you see a conflict point, you have to think to yourself, what is going to happen based on this conflict? So he decides that he's going to break the plate. When he does break the plate, it causes chaos in the yard because it's a very loud noise. It frightened his mother. She started to choke. The chickens got into the breakfast food on the table. His father comes out to see what is going on. All of this is coming from what? Frank breaking the plate. So here we have the climax and the resolution of this particular conflict coming to the fore. There's more. Now Frank has to get ready for school. He is getting ready. His friends, Daniel and Chiselhead is, of course, an alias, came to see if he was ready, and they end up leaving him because they don't want to be late for school. The two boys, Frank is still at home. They arrive just before teacher days goes to the gate to flog the latecomers, and that is another conflict that we see being introduced, but that is going to be coming up in the next chapter. We also briefly see the character of King Myrodus. So plot summary overall. The conflict one, as we mentioned before, he doesn't want to get up, and that creates another problem. He has to figure out how to get away from his mother. That's another problem. He hits his mother accidentally. That's the climax of this particular conflict. Resolution, he gets away. Problem solved. Another conflict, to get back into her good graces, he decides, see what we mean? It's a decision that he makes. So the conflict coming in, he has to make a choice. He gets back home, completes the chores, gets his breakfast, and decides again to break the plate, which adds another conflict. Breaking the plate causes a commotion, and we have his mother choking, a lot of excitement in the yard, the climax and the resolution coming right there. Another conflict point, his friends come to get him for school, but he is not quite ready. They remind him that teacher days is going to flog those who are coming late. All right, that wasn't too bad, was it? Let's take a look now at the characters. Our major character, Frank Grant and Mrs. Grant, that's his mother. Minor characters, Mr. Grant, that's Frank's father. Medicine is the strap that she uses to flog him. Remember when we spoke about characters in our literature overview, we said that characters can be anything. And medicine, even though it's an inanimate object, it adds something to the story, because without the strap there will be no flogging, right? So it is a minor character. Tiny, which is the puppy that's barking. So the animals are all a part of your character base because they're adding to the story in some way, form, or shape. They have a role. Jeff, Daniel, and Chiselhead are also minor characters. The other children are also minor characters. Let's take a look at the character sketches. And we're going to be doing the character sketches for the main characters especially. We will do character sketches for some minors depending on how they impact the overall story. So for Frank, we learned that he is a 13-year-old boy. He's going to be 14 in another month. He's quite agile. I mean, that's agility at work, the way that he got away from his mother. He's mischievous as well, because we see when he went to the river how he wanted to put a chip in the cup that Miss Cordelia left by the river. He's quite proud. He says it, that he's proud because he doesn't feel as if he should be getting flogged by his mother, and that affects his self-esteem and his pride. For Mrs. Grant, she is verbally and physically abusive to both her husband and child, and we see many instances of that coming out. The way she speaks to both of them, the mere fact that she was flogging Frank, that in and of itself speaks to how abusive she is. She's a very coarse woman, and she quarrels a lot. She's very hardworking as well. She is moving around the kitchen, getting breakfast prepared, in spite of how the morning started. I think we can also say that she's a smoker, because at one point, Frank, in describing her, mentions her smoke-blackened teeth. So she's a smoker as well. Mr. Grant, he's a minor in this case, but we still have to give him his props. He's a farmer, and he's a very docile and timid man. He's not in for the excitement and in for the argument and things like that. Medicine, the beating strap, as we said before, and all of the other characters and how they impact the story overall. Let's now take a look at the setting. So this is what I was saying when I wasn't talking about the plot, and some things that I did not want to mention yet because we were going to be looking at them in the setting. So remember, setting now speaks to time and place. So time here is early morning, like physical clock time. It's early morning before the sun comes up. How do we know this? Based on what is said about the environment in terms of the cool or the cold breeze. At one point, way down in the story, it mentions the sun was just coming over the hill. So it stands to reason that we can assume that at the beginning of the story, it was still pretty dark, or maybe that kind of, the sky is getting a little bit light, but it's going to be another hour or so before the sun is actually up, that sort of time. It's also mid-January, it says it. It says it if you read carefully in that, somewhere in the first two paragraphs, it says it's about the middle of January. This will also tell us that if it's the middle of January, Frank's birthday, Frank will be 14 in the middle of February. And based on how things are described, we know that it's not a very modern time. In Jamaica, those of us who live in Jamaica and are adults, we could have an idea what this is talking about. It's not a very modern time. In terms of place, we know it's in the countryside somewhere. Again, based on how it is described. And the themes overall for this chapter. The first one that comes out is abuse. And there are three types of abuse that we see taking place. We see physical abuse, of course, with Mrs. Grant flogging Frank. We see verbal abuse in terms of the things that she's saying to him. I remember one of the statements that she made was "bore hog," when he was eating the food very quickly, and she referred to him as "bore hog," "nyam the food good," or something like that. And that's not a very, complimentary term. So we know the verbal abuse, and we know she verbally abuses Mr. Grant as well, because at one point when Mr. Grant was saying leave the boy alone or whatever, she said to him, "Mine a turn medicine on you." So we know that it's not far from her to beat both her husband and her child. And we also see neglect in when Frank came back from the river soaking wet, and she told him, he's going to keep on the wet clothes until he's ready for school and something like that. And typically speaking, a child comes home wet. A caring parent, especially if the environment is pretty cold as it was in the hills, you'd be afraid that your child would catch up cold and stuff like that. Get out of the wet clothes. No. She told him keep it on. So we see some neglect coming in there. We see, of course, family relationships. Not the best of relationships, but the theme overall of family relationships. And we see the family dynamic in the Grant's household at work. We see friendships, of course, with Frank and his classmates. And we see a simple living existence. It's not a fancy broom that he used to sweep the yard. It's a very simple farming community. Everything that was described is pretty simple. No fancy curtains, no fancy beds, no fancy kitchen. Everything is pretty simple. So, that was a mouthful. Let us see what you remember. What are the two main conflicts presented in the story? All right. Frank not wanting to get up and Frank not liking the chipped plate. Good, you remembered. Let's see what else you remember. Who are the two main characters? That's an easy one. Two main characters. Frank and his mother. How do the minor characters of the animals add to the overall plot of the story? Note, I said the minor characters of the animals. Okay, their behavior enhances the conflicts as they unfold. Remember when Frank was being flogged, Tiny was barking up a storm? So he was adding to the overall chaos of the situation at the time. And when Frank broke the plate, the chickens were doing their mischief and they enhanced the conflict as it unfolded as well. How is the theme of abuse portrayed? We just spoke about it. Through the characters of Mrs. Grant. She's the only person. I just thought of something. Maybe there's a minor theme of animal abuse based on what Frank was doing with the chicken. How he hit the chicken. But we digress. But the main themes that we spoke about, they're portrayed through the character of Mrs. Grant. Remember, we spoke about when we looked at themes that it's the characters who bring out the themes in the story. So, happy reading!